Hello and welcome to the Expat Reality Podcast. I'm your host, Annie.
And I'm your host, Steve.
And in this podcast, we're going to explore the reality of living life as an expat in Australia and what it really means to feel like you belong.
Join us as we uncover the challenges and opportunities that expat life presents on the search for settled.
With our stories, tips and interviews, see us as your two friends to help you navigate expat life abroad. Just to let you know, this video podcast series is brought to you by the team at Auric Migration and Mobility. Now, Auric have helped us personally with my visa process to Australia, and we only know too well how difficult the entire process can be if you're doing it by yourself. They have also helped hundreds of our followers, and they're offering our listeners an initial assessment for free. Email them your visa situation, questions or concerns, and they will get back to you at no extra cost. Simply mention the Expat Reality Podcast when you email them at migration@auric.com. Auric is spelled A-U-R-E-C. So that's migration@auric.com. In this episode, we're going to talk about how we met and why we ended up living in Australia. It's actually kind of a cool story, and I think sometimes it does actually feel like it was a bit of a movie. So we're going to talk about how we met in the Himalayas, and we're going to also talk about why we always seem to gravitate back to Australia after lots of travels around the world over the last 11 years, which actually brings me to, it's quite a significant week this week because it's actually 11 years this week since I got on a plane to India from England. So we're going to take it right back to why I jumped on that plane and why Steve was in India as well and how we actually met. So it's a bit of a unique story, and most people always seem to think that we either met in England or Australia. So we kind of feel quite proud when we tell them our story because it is quite different to probably what you would imagine.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a different story. You know, it's kind of like a little bit of the eat, pray, love thing going on. So I think there's a bit of a story to be told there. So some interesting moments.
Absolutely. So let's go back to 2010. At that time, I was living in London. I was working in radio. As you might be able to hear, I have a radio voice.
I think you've got a very good radio voice.
Well, in actual fact, I worked on reception at a radio station in London, and it was like the best 3 years of my life working there. I loved it. Went to lots of parties. I did voiceovers for the station, and I like had so much fun, like pretending to not know who celebrities were when they came in. And I remember like meeting like Meatloaf, and I didn't even know like how to like talk to him. I was like, what do you say? Do you call him Mr. Meat, Mr. Loaf,
Mr. Loaf? Oh, he's at the excuse me, Mr. Loaf. Your elevator is ready. There's some meat upstairs. Need some carving.
Oh. Anyway, so having a great time in London at the time, but then my world got completely turned upside down and my mother passed away. So at the time I was 27, and if anyone has been through anything like that when you're in your 20s, oh my gosh, it is just the worst thing ever. And at the time I was like, right, I need to change my life, and I wanted to either like move house or change jobs. And I remember my brother saying, like, don't try and change everything at once. So I was like, okay, I'm going to change jobs. So I changed jobs, ended up working for an events company, which I hated. And then I was like, okay, this isn't working. And my housemate at the time was like, I want to go and travel. And I was like, I do too. Let's go. And the reason why I went to India, like Steve said about the Eat, Pray, Love thing, is because I watched that movie, and Julia Roberts' character, I felt so like, what's the word? I felt
inspired.
Yeah, I felt like so connected to her character. Yeah. And because I was going through such a rough time, I was like, I need to go to India. I need to go to an ashram. And one of the guys at the radio station that I worked with, he had been to India and he did a meditation course there. And he was like, don't do an ashram, they're a bit too intense. You should go and do this like introduction to Buddhism course that I did, and it's really good. So I was like, right, we're going to go and do that. So I left England 11 years ago this week on the plane to India, which I was so overwhelmed when I got there. It was crazy.
I mean, you can imagine that you're soft off the plane. You're in this kind of headspace where, you're kind of just not feeling the best. And all of a sudden there's like, rickshaws buzzing past and, spices and kind of all this kind of happening stuff. And yeah, you kind of dropped into this completely different environment. So it must have been pretty full on, I think,
Oh
being
my
in that
God.
sort of headspace.
I remember me and my friend, we arrived in Delhi and we were like walking down the street to try and find a travel agent for some, I think we were like, right, we need to get out of here. And these two guys like came and like followed us and they were like, hey, let's go for lunch together. And we were like, what? And they like took us to some like random travel agent that was trying to charge us like £10,000 to go and do a trip. And we were like, hang on, this feels really weird, which we didn't do, obviously. But I mean, I wasn't that well traveled at the time. So it was a very overwhelming experience. So we decided, we were like, we need to get up to like, to McLeod Ganj, which is at the foothills of the Himalayas, which is where the Dalai Lama lives, where the meditation course was taking place. Not at his place, but in
a place nearby, yeah.
And so basically we managed to get on the course that was the course before the one we were meant to be on. And meanwhile, Steve, you were in India as well at the same time.
Yeah, so I was traveling around and I was like, I really need to, clear my head. I need to get back to the fundamentals and just be one with myself again. I thought, I need to do this meditation retreat. And I was actually booked to do the course that was the one before.
Yeah, you were meant to do the one before and I was meant to do the one after.
That's right. I was meant to do, yeah. And so all of a sudden there's this coincidental point in time and we both end up on the same course. And yeah, it was kind of this weird serendipity where we kind of ended up, being on the same course.
And it's actually quite a funny story when we tell people we met at a meditation retreat, because it was actually a silent meditation retreat.
So you can imagine how tricky that is, right, to kind of get to know someone on a silent meditation retreat.
So basically, and during the course, 1 hour a day, you would be put into a group, the same group every day, and you'd have to discuss topics about Buddhism. And Steve was in my group, and that's how I got to know him. And after the course finished, Steve, you were heading up to this town called Leh in the middle of the Himalayas.
Yeah, it's amazing. You got this amazing town just surrounded by mountains, like really super high, 5,000 meter high mountains, and it's just stunning. And it's an amazing road to get up there, actually. If you go, there's actually a road from Manali in the north of India up to Leh, and it's kind of one of the most scariest roads in the whole world. It's super narrow. It's not really enough for two trucks to pass at the same time.
I think, didn't you have like a near-death experience?
Well, many times going up there. It was pretty crazy, and but it's stunningly beautiful, and yeah, super recommended if you get the chance. But yeah, so off I went up there, and then you turned up.
Yeah, so I saw Steve. For me, it was kind of like love at first sight for me with Steve, and I always had like a thing for Australians already. And when I found out he was going to Leh, like Steve was a bit of a legend in that sort of traveler circle, because you'd been to India a few times before, you were really well traveled, and I was like, oh my God, this guy's like amazing. And so you were going up with a few other people we knew, and I was like, okay, I want to go too. So I turned up a few days before you because I flew. And if you ever get the chance to fly into Leh, oh my gosh, it's unbelievable. You're flying through the Himalayas, and before you know, you're like, where are we going to land? And then before you know it, you see like this town in the middle of nowhere, and then you're landing into it. And it blew my mind being in a town like that and thinking, wow, I bet most of the people here probably never left this town, or left this area, and yet there's a whole world outside of it. I found it so incredible.
Yeah, and the people are like, they've got a lot of Tibetan heritage, obviously, because they're right next door. So, it's this really, it's an amazing kind of melting pot of different cultures, and it's just stunningly beautiful. Yeah,
absolutely beautiful. And so. Anyway, I waited for Steve to turn up to Leh, and now I know him very well. He's not the best at communicating on social media. So I'd sent him a few Facebook messages back then, didn't hear anything back, and I was like, okay, it's obvious he's not interested in me in the slightest. And so I was like, right, I'm just going to go and book a tour by myself, and I'm going to go and visit more of the Himalayas on a tour. And so I walked into a travel agent. And if you've ever been into a travel agent in India, sometimes they might have like a bed in the shop because they might have a snooze.
A lot of people sleep where they kind of work. It's sad to say, but it's kind of, they work a lot of hours, so it makes it easier, kind of avoiding having to go home, I guess.
So I walked into the travel agents and the guy was asleep. And I was like, oh, great. So I thought, I'll come back later, I'll book the tour, and I'm going to leave like tomorrow and just sack off the idea of seeing Steve and the guys. And as soon as I walked out of the shop, I bumped into someone I knew and they were like, oh my gosh, Steve and the guys are here. They're looking for you. And I was like, what? No way. And then a few minutes later, I bumped into Steve in the street. And that was the moment when I think you looked at me very differently. And you were like, wow, you look...
Well, you've been good looking. And, what are you doing here, eh? You should be, we should hang out. We should, And
you said like, oh, you seem really different. But I think it was in like a good way. So... I was like, oh, okay. And then you said, we're going to go hiking tomorrow. Are you coming? Now, before I left on that plane from England, I remember my brother always saying to me, like, don't ever miss up an opportunity. Like, always say yes when people ask you to do something. Always say yes.
I think that's the number one thing in travel, I think, and is just always, if there's an opportunity in front of you, just do it. Just go and see where it leads.
And I think as people, we tend to just say no because it's sort of, we don't want to put ourselves out of our comfort zone. So I was like, yes, I'll come trekking. I'd never hiked ever in my life. Like, we went on this hike for 3 days up to 5,000 meters in the Himalayas, and I was wearing a pair of Nike trainers and a pair of board shorts. I literally looked like I was going to the beach.
I mean, that's what, of course, the first thing comes to mind. I'm going to go trekking, get a pair of skimpy shorts and a tank top, away I go, up with my little running shoes on, boom. And so you weren't quite 100% equipped for that
I was
expedition.
Totally not. But it was amazing. It was honestly like the best things I've ever done. We were with an amazing group of people who we still feel very like, connected to in a sense, don't we? And anyway, on the first day of the trek, we spent quite a bit of time together, and then we got to this homestay in the middle of nowhere. And I remember seeing Steve outside, and I think you were taking some photographs.
Yeah, I mean, picture this, right? It's this little tiny, Tibetan homestay. You've got, Tibetan grandmas cooking up tea or yak tea. You have the tinkering of like the goats around everywhere, and it's this kind of like, kind of setting the scene of this crisp mountain air. And he comes down, she walks and kind of cruises over. And
I kind of knew at that moment, I was like, this is my moment to go and approach him. And so I just did. And then within probably a minute or two, we shared our first kiss. And until we got interrupted by the lady who owns the homestay, and we were like mortified, but it was really funny.
Yeah, she wasn't exactly jazzed that we're out there having a little smooch under the moonlight. So,
but if you have ever tried to kiss someone, and at the time I remember we're 4,000 meters high from sea level. If you've ever tried to kiss someone that high up, it is like impossible to
imagine snorkeling and trying to have a smooch. Probably a similar kind of experience, I guess.
So we traveled around India together for 3 weeks, and we had the most amazing time together. But then my visa ran out and I had to go into Thailand to work in a bar, which was like a proper dream of mine. And when we were leaving each other, I remember saying to you, I was like, I feel like I could fall in love with you. And you were like, don't be so stupid. You're at the start of your trip. I'm towards the end. Go and have the time of your life. And we left each other in Jaipur
on the train station. Picture, you've got like literally, you're like a rock star. You're on the train station, you're having a bit of a smooch. And next thing we look around, we've got like everyone hanging out of the trains, like gawking. And it's like we're on a movie set or something.
There was literally like thousands of people there. And everyone was hanging out at the train windows or the train doors, and they were all watching us say our goodbye. And I was like in tears, and it was literally like a scene from a movie. And so we went our separate ways, and I went off to Thailand. And then Steve, where did you go?
Oh, I went off to the Andaman Islands. I have to say it is like one of my favorite like places to visit. It's halfway between India and Thailand. It's a little island chain that you need to fly out of India to get to. It's supremely beautiful, just little villages scattered across these islands, and you've got to get to know the locals and that sort of thing to find somewhere to stay. Supremely beautiful and highly, highly recommended, definitely.
There you go. There's Steve's little plug to a place that's probably no more like not idyllic anymore. It's probably going to be with heaps.
I'll
of
probably
tourists
get there and
everywhere.
it'll be like 20 hotels or something. I don't know. This
At
is not
least.
so long ago, but
So I went to go and work in a bar in Thailand, and I went to Koh Tao, and it was a little dream of mine just to have that sort of sense of freedom. And I made loads of mates, and it was brilliant. But at the same time, I really missed Steve a lot. And because he was away in the Andamans where there was no internet, like we literally just lost contact for a month or two. And I remember this moment, and it was day after Halloween, because I had a big Halloween party in the bar. And back then, like no one had laptops or iPhones or anything like that.
you had to go to the internet cafe. It wasn't like, it is now everyone's got phones.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah, so I went to the internet cafe just before I was about to start my next shift. And I was like, I'll just go on, just see what's going on Facebook. And then Steve popped up, and we ended up talking for a couple of hours, I think, on Skype. And by the end of the conversation, we had both decided that because Steve was going to go on to Taiwan to teach. And he was like, I'm going to come to Thailand before I go to Taiwan to see you. And I was like, great. So we had decided that. And then the next few weeks, we spent every day, we spent 2 hours talking on Skype. I don't even know what we talked about, but we'd always talk every single day.
we found things to talk about.
And then we had made this plan, right? So Steve was going to go off to Nepal to go and do another meditation course. You're going to go for a month.
Yeah.
And then
There's a month-long course in Kopan Monastery. It's an amazing opportunity, and I actually went to the course, and I started the course I was there about a week, and I think in the back of my mind I was thinking, I don't feel like this is the right place for me to be right now. I think I need to go and explore what's going to happen, in the other part of my life and what's happening with Annie, and see where that goes. So, I ended up sort of going to the internet cafe and messaging Annie, and
well, that was the thing, because Steve was going off to do this course. Meanwhile, I was going to leave Thailand. I was like, right, I'm going to go and do the circuit and do Laos and Cambodia and Vietnam. And then I was going to meet him back in Bangkok like a month later. I'd literally just got into Siem Reap, which is where you go into the famous Angkor Wat, after a long day traveling. And when I got there, another moment where I was like, just going to check the internet before bed, which is not something I would have done really back then. Had all these messages from Steve, and I was like, how on earth has he got access to email me? Because he's in this meditation retreat. And he was like, I've left the retreat. I'm coming to see you now. And I was like, what? And you know what? At the time, I was really annoyed, because I was like,
you just endured this bone rattling journey to get there. And next thing, now this guy's kind of interested.
I was really annoyed because I traveled all that way. And then, I don't know if I've ever told you this, but I was really annoyed because he changed his Facebook status to say that he was in a relationship with me. And I was like, oh my God, what is he doing? It's not even really been confirmed. And back then,
it was a big deal. If you change your status, everyone was like,
it was a huge thing, wasn't
deal.
it? And then because you didn't want to do it, because you were like, if I change my status to in a relationship, I'm going to have to change it back again if it doesn't work out. So I was I was kind of really annoyed, but at the same time, I was really excited. And then we had a big chat on the phone, and I was like, right, okay, I'm going to come back. So I spent 2, maybe 3 days in Siem Reap. And I always remember the last night there, because it literally felt like it was my hen's night, because I knew that was going to be it. Steve was going to be the only one for me for the rest of my life.
So you're down on Bar Street with all the girls, having a good time. I think that's it. It's final blowout. It's all happening now.
What are they called? The buckets, isn't it?
Buckets. It's I can only imagine what there is in there now. But
lethal Sang-som and whiskey.
The nastiest whiskey they can find in the
God,
cabinet, and away you go.
And so we had this big night out, and then I went back to Bangkok, and I was really excited, but I was really nervous to see Steve. And then I get to the airport, and I'm at the arrivals gate, and when I was there was loads of people waiting as well, and there was some barriers up, so you couldn't actually go in. You obviously couldn't go into where people were coming out from, from customs. And Steve walks out with his backpack, he flings it off, And then I went and like jumped over the barrier and we just ran to each other.
It's like cue music, you know, it's like this kind of filmic moment where we're kind of running to each other and like everyone's surrounding us. I can almost, I think the crowd was probably cheering, I think. I don't know, maybe.
I wasn't even
I don't know, but it felt like that anyway, so.
Yeah. And so, and that's what happened. And then I remember saying to him, I was like, I don't want to be apart from you really again. And he was like, it's not going to happen. And then that night, I literally just told him I loved him without even thinking about it, just blurted it out. And thankfully he said it back too, which was a huge thing for me because my love life was pretty rubbish before I met Steve. So it was a big moment in our time together. And then we went and traveled for a couple of months around Thailand, and where else did we go?
We went to Myanmar and Laos. Yeah, we
we?
did this crazy hot air balloon journey and almost crashed.
That was in Laos, wasn't it? Oh my God, so many stories. So we ended up coming back to Australia because Australia was on my list. Now, I'm just going to take it back a little bit further because I'd actually come to Australia in 2006 on a working holiday visa. So I spent a year in Australia, and during that time, I did 3 months fruit picking, which means if you do that, you can then get another working holiday visa as long as you use it before you turn 31. So at the time I was, how old was I? 29, I think, when I met you, 28. God, I can't remember. But the main thing was it was before I was turning 31. So I had another working holiday visa sitting there for me to use. You don't have to use them straight after each other. So I applied for that, and then I entered into Australia on the working holiday visa. So our plan was that we were going to stay for like a year, save up, and then we were going to go to South America because South America was I'd actually booked flights to go to South America anyway on this.
It was like we had to complete the journey Annie was destined to do from the beginning. So
yeah, so I'd actually booked like a 6-month trip with like STA Travel back when they were still operating, and one of those stops was to go to South America. And Steve had actually already been, but he was like, we're both sort of out of money. Let's stay in Australia for a year. We'll save up. Then we'll go and do another trip around the world, and we'll make sure we start off in South America, and I'll show you all these cool places. So I was like, great. So we then were in Australia from 2012 to 2013. And that was a really interesting experience because the time before when I came, I lived that sort of backpacker life where I lived right near Darling Harbour. I lived in like a 3-bedroom place that there was like 10 of us living there.
10 beds in a 3-bed. Yeah. Okay. The standard kind of
it was
backpacker experience.
Definitely. And now this experience was, I was living out in the middle of the suburbs with Steve's family for a year, and it was like a hugely different experience. And I had like these jobs where I was like a temp working for like loads of different government organizations where, you know, I was no longer like working in a call center or working in a bar.
And he actually had a job where she was supposed to go and evict people. And
no, I didn't. I didn't take that job, but it was offered to me.
I could just imagine Annie turning up and, excuse me, I've got to leave, please. So I can just.
I would have been rubbish. I'd be like, oh no, just stay. I'll sort it out. Don't worry. We'll see what we can do.
Yeah, we'll sort something out. It'll be all right.
So we spent a year living in Australia, and then we embarked on another year around the world. So during that time, when we went off to South America, it was a big dream of ours to go and travel around Africa, which we didn't really know much about. And as you probably might think, most people think Africa is going to be super dangerous to travel around. And we were like, do we do a tour? Do we do it separately? And we kind of wanted to do it by ourselves. And so we were like, we'll just suss it out when we get there.
I mean, there wasn't a terrible lot of information. I mean, it was a little bit further back in time. I mean, there wasn't as much written on it as there is now. I don't think there's like a terrible lot on how to get around anyway in Africa by yourself. But at the time, you're kind of thinking, how's this going to work? And kind of the unknown. In the end, it turned out super easy.
Oh, my God. And it's an amazing continent to go and visit. So we started off in Kenya. And then the reason why I'm telling you this part of the story is because during this trip was a huge moment, like a turning point in our lives in a sense, because when we got to Malawi, we ended up meeting a couple of British women who were running some charities there, and what they were doing were absolutely amazing. And they needed a couple of people to teach some of the school kids because their current teachers are leaving. Now, I had no teaching experience at all. Steve, you've done a course before, hey?
Yeah, I did actually did a CELTA. So I had a bit of kind of classroom sort of teaching course experience, but no kind of real life, getting amongst it in the classroom experience. So it was a first for me in that sense, but I had a bit of an idea what I might have been in for with the teaching of it at least.
So we taught these kids and they were like between 4 and 7 years old. They were super cute. And but during that time, even though teaching the kids felt very rewarding, we didn't feel like it was something that was going to be sustainable in the long term. So we decided that we were going to help them by building a brand new website. So I had some marketing experience from back home. Steve literally just taught it all himself.
I'd had some experience like tinkering around with websites, but I hadn't really been like in the thick of it, and didn't really have much of a deep understanding of it. So yeah, it was a learning experience, but it was amazing, absolutely.
And it was really hard to try and build a website when the internet would literally crash every few seconds, but we did it.
Power cuts, you had like you'd be working, all of a sudden, power cut out, you just lost everything you did. So, there was these kind of moments where super frustrating, but the reward of it was just awesome, and it was such a great experience.
And we're still in contact with them now. So, I mean, if you do ever want to go and volunteer in Africa or anywhere really, then I definitely recommend checking them out. They are called Butterfly Space in Malawi. So the reason why I'm telling you that story is because when we ended up back in Australia, that's when we started a popular blog called Londoner in Sydney. But just before we get into that, it was really funny because by the time we got down to South Africa, which we absolutely loved, we had planned to go and live in Vietnam and go and teach, because we were like, we'll just become teachers and we'll teach in Vietnam. And we lasted a week there, and it was like, oh my God.
So we went from this kind of, pristine, like South African beach life experience to like being in a big smoggy city with lots of motorbikes. So it was kind of a bit of a transition between those two. And I don't think...
Slightly overwhelming.
Yeah, it was a little bit overwhelming. And so, we both knew what we were in for, but I just don't think that contrast was something we were quite prepared for.
I don't think we were prepared for it in the slightest, looking back on it. So anyways, we got to the point where we were like, we need to get out of here. The only place we can really go back to is Australia, where we've got somewhere to stay. So when we got back, I decided that I wanted to work in fashion at the time. So that's why I started our now popular blog called Londoner in Sydney back in 2014. So Londoner in Sydney was a fashion blog to begin with. And oh my gosh, I can only say top marks to any fashion influencers out there, because it takes so much time to prepare to do any of that stuff. Like I would spend hours in front of the mirror working out what outfits I was going to wear for Steve to take shots of me.
Okay. And I also just want to say that, any Insta hubbies or anyone out there who is taking pictures for these influencers, my heart goes out, because I understand. I understand the deep, sort of pain you feel while you're waiting and waiting and waiting for that right light, that right, moment when you can take the picture, or just even like collating all the clothes.
Oh my God. So
finding the spots.
So we would go on a Saturday morning. I would drag Steve out to like the best garage doors or wherever.
We saw a lot of garage doors.
To take photos. Meanwhile, and that lasted about I think we did that for about 1.5 to 2 years. But I had created a few posts on some like expat visas and stuff like that, which were doing really well. And I think around about 2016, 2017 is when we fully transitioned from the fashion style to really helping people move to Australia, and started sharing some really cool experiences to do, especially around Sydney, because I was actually sent a book about wild swimming in Sydney, and that started my love for really exploring the great outdoors around Sydney. And
it's like finding those open spaces, and that, you have this kind of, 9 to 5 job, and you're kind of, crammed in the office or something. So you want to kind of have that, outdoors, kind of get in the fresh air, and finding those swimming holes like this little kind of surprise or this little reward at the end of a long bushwalk. And I think that was kind of this thing. And we got into a bit of a routine where we'd almost go and find all these amazing little kind of hidden gems.
Absolutely. It was a weekend thing that we'd always do. And it was awesome at the time. And now I think back to it, when we first came to Australia in like 2011, And Steve would try to take me on a bushwalk in like the Royal National Park, which is near Sydney. And I would be freaking out going, oh my God, spiders, snakes. Like, oh, I can't take it. But
Walk through a little bush that was like knee height, was, full of trepidation and fear. And
now I'm the one dragging you on
yeah,
it,
she's like,
so,
I'm fine now. Just walk along. It's all good.
which is kind of funny with the animals in Australia, how you just weirdly accept it and it's kind of becomes part of normal life, which is a whole nother topic to talk about another time. But
another episode perhaps.
Absolutely. And so after 4 years of then living in Australia and building up London and Sydney, we had decided that we needed to do one last trip around the world. We both had bucket list places that we really wanted to go to. And so we packed up our stuff, we sold most of it, and we then embarked on 1 year travels around the world at the beginning of 2018. So we were really lucky on that trip because we went to like the Maldives, we backpacked around there. We went to Nepal and hiked to Everest Base Camp.
Bucket list item, seriously amazing.
Hugely one.
And who did we meet on the Everest Base Camp? We actually ran into Ant Middleton, SAS Australia, the guy, the man, the legend.
Guy from that, which is a really funny story because we didn't know who he was at the time because obviously I hadn't lived in England for so long. And we just saw him actually at Everest Base Camp with a cameraman. And so we started having a chat with him. And
when you see some guy, right, standing there and he's looking kind of very sort of rugged and just he had this sort of air about him. Like there's someone, this guy is someone. This is someone important here. So
I tell you what though, he was super nice.
He was really nice.
His persona on TV is not the same. No. He's like a really, really nice person.
Character.
But the point to that story was so I was like, oh, can I interview you? And we didn't know who he was. And I was like, he must be like an athlete or something or like an Olympian. And so I interviewed him and he was doing a documentary about climbing up to the top of the summit. And we watched that documentary a few months later and he actually nearly died. And we were like, wow, we could have had like his last interview.
Exclusive last final interview with Ant Middleton.
Proper crazy. But now he's becoming a big star in Australia, which is awesome for him. But anyways, so during that trip, we ended up in Cuba at one point, and that was when Steve turned to me. And what did he say?
I said, Annie, I think we have to go back and live in the UK.
Which for me was amazing because we'd been away for like 7 years. And bear in mind, my trip was only meant to be 6 months of backpacking around the world. And then now it'd become 7 years. So I was really excited about getting to go and live back in England again. So we turned up in the June and we thought the visa process was going to be quite similar to what it was in Australia for me, getting a partner visa, but it isn't at all in England.
No, it's a big, huge, long process, and we had to go back to Australia. And
oh my God, it's so hard. But
a lot harder than we thought it was.
I think we'll talk about that visa process in
another episode. Yeah.
But what happened basically is I had to get a job for part of Steve's visa, and I actually got a job back in radio, which was awesome for me. And it was right in the middle of London. And I was like, wow, this is so cool. I get to be back living and doing what I loved doing before. So it was really cool to be living back in England again. I was so excited, but it actually didn't turn out in the same as what I hoped for at all. And within 6 months, we ended up deciding that we were going to move back to Australia. And we'll do a whole episode about what happened during that time in England. But so we came back to Australia and Steve ended up getting like this amazing remote job, which let's just bear in mind, back in 2019, before the pandemic.
Remote jobs were very, kind of hard to find. And then I was super excited. I was like, this is perfect. I get to work on websites and it's remote. And yeah, it was really good.
So we felt like that was a golden ticket. We were like, great, we get that freedom. We can live wherever we want, but it had to sort of be in the Australian sort of time zone, but that was fine. So we decided we're going to go pet sitting so we can save some money. I can work on Londoner site and Steve will do his job and support us basically. So we started pet sitting up and down the coast. Now, we ended up in a town called Agnes Water in 1770 in Queensland. We thought it was going to be near Cairns. It's not. Queensland is ginormous. It was actually like 19 hours from Cairns.
Agnes Water is stunning. It's beautiful. You've got like pristine beaches. It's like super untouched. It's really like crystal clear water and really amazing part of the world. Some really nice people there as well. So we thought we'd, hit the jackpot really.
We did. And it is, honestly, if you ever get to go, it is one of the most beautiful beach towns in Australia by far. And we ended up being there for 3 months, but then the pandemic started. And at the time, obviously, no one really knew what was going on. And so we were like, well, do we head back to Newcastle where your family are, who, bear in mind, are kind of getting on a little bit? And we were like, do we go there and put them at risk, or what do we do? So we were like, let's just get an Airbnb in Agnes and we'll just camp out there for however long.
Yeah, to see where this it ends up going, because no one really knew. I mean, it was the pandemic was completely unknown. Was this some kind of virus that was going to cause major disruption to everyone's lives and, all this sort of thing, but no one had any idea. So we just thought, yeah, you know what, if we're going to be in any place, being in paradise is probably not a bad place.
Oh my God, we were so lucky to be there. We were really lucky to be in that town for those few months. And we kind of thought that, maybe we'll be here for like 2 or 3 months at the most. And then once they kind of opened up travel again, it was around about the June time, we were like, right, let's make a beeline. We'll come down to Sunshine Coast, see if this is where we want to live. But it was really, really competitive and really hard to get anywhere. And we were like totally overwhelmed by it. And then we decided, no, actually, we feel like Agnes Water is our home, and so we decided to stay there. So we ended up staying there for a couple of years, and we got to the point where we needed to be around a bit more life again because it was so remote.
I mean, Agnes Water is beautiful and it's amazing, but it literally is just 2 streets and there's just a handful of shops and not a lot to do while it's raining. So I mean, It is outdoors. I mean, it's the beautiful outdoors, and that's the thing. So it was a bit tricky.
So, anyways, I think we'll do another episode about what regional living is actually.
Pros and cons of regional living, definitely.
Well, not just the pros and cons, but I think it just surprised a lot of people who have come from a city and think it's this sort of romantic, idyllic life living regionally, and it is quite different from that. But we decided in the end, after a couple of years of living there, and it was really hard to leave actually because we had a really nice house that we were living in, and we decided, let's go and move down to the Sunshine Coast, which is where we are right now. Yeah. And we've been here for actually nearly a year, which has flown by. Now we're at the point where we are just deciding what to do next, really.
Yeah, what the next steps may be, we don't quite know, but we're working on it. So
I think for us, because we are travellers at heart, we do tend to have this sort of feeling of change, don't we, quite a bit. But yeah, we'll see what happens. But that is basically our story in a nutshell for you. So
it's a pretty amazing story. We don't know quite what the next steps are, but I think it's going to be pretty good, whatever we do.
Thanks so much for listening to our episode today about how we met and why we are currently in Australia. Our journey is forever evolving and changing, and we are taking you along with us so we can share everything that we're learning about the sort of transition of being an expat and living in various places and different countries, wherever the next place may take us. So if you're feeling a little bit lost or you're unsure about where you're meant to be in the world, this podcast is for you.
Yes. Thanks for listening. This is the Expat Reality Podcast. Cheers.
We'll be back soon.
Bye.
Bye.